Hi everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. Today we're going to be doing a Season 1 Warband review video looking at the Chosen Axes. And just to summarize, these guys basically at one point were commissioned to protect Shadespire, which they clearly failed to do since the Gaseous Curse took over the whole place, and they sort of have a grudge-fueled quest to take the place back over, even though many people before them have failed in their efforts. During this review, I'm going to be looking at these guys' fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, mainly their objective cards and power cards. Then I'm going to be rating this warband on a scale of S to D, S being great and D needing a massive overhaul. So with this in mind, let's get started by checking out these guys' fighter cards. So Chosen Axes is a 4-unit warband led by Phil Grimnir. They all inspire the same way, which is to be holding an objective in the end phase. A very challenging thing to pull off. But these guys debatably get one of the biggest boosts in the game from inspiring. I mean, Thundrik's Profiteers probably get a bigger boost, and debatably Lady Harrow's Mournflight. Let's just have a closer look at these guys to see exactly what they start with and what they get. Starting with the leader, Phil Grimnir. Big melee fighter hitting really hard with medium accuracy, 2 hammers, 3 damage, 2 hammers, 4 damage, and cleave when inspired. Starting off with terrible movement, only 2 movement, but upon becoming inspired, gets 3 movement and also gets an increase in his wounds characteristic, going up to 5 wounds, making him one of the toughest guys in the game. We got Tefk Flamebearer, who probably gets the biggest overall boost in this warband. He goes from 2 options of attacks, one with medium accuracy for decent damage, and one with really high accuracy but only for 1 damage. But upon becoming inspired, these things merge to form into the Blazing Axes, being a melee attack that hits with 3 hammers, doing 3 damage, and gets cleave when a critical die roll is made. And similar to Grimnir, also gets a bonus to movement and a bonus to move, going from 2 movement to 3 movement and 3 wounds to 4 wounds. We have Mad Megrim. Very decent accuracy, 3 swords but only doing 1 damage. Upon inspiring, does 2 damage and also gets a reroll, also getting that boost to movement and wounds. And finally there's Vol Oricbane. It's a little bit harder but with lower accuracy, kind of like Grimnir, albeit with a little bit less damage. 2 hammers for 2 damage, then 2 hammers for 3 damage inspired, also gaining knockback 1, and once again increasing in wounds and movement. So that's the warband. Let's look at the pros and the cons. Pros being that they have special combat abilities. 2 of these units get cleave when inspired. Vol gets knockback when inspired. They have decent to high accuracy, mainly when inspired. They do very high damage, but only when inspired. They have many wounds, once again once they're inspired. And they have a medium model number, which means they have enough models to typically have no wasted activations. But they have a pretty heavy con list as well, mainly that they have very low movement. I mean, these guys have 2 movement, which is terrible, makes it hard to reach anybody, makes it hard to do anything, and only goes up to 3 when these guys are inspired, which is a little bit better. And they have probably the most difficult to achieve inspire mechanic in the game, with the possible exception of the Farstriders. I mean, holding an objective in an end phase is very difficult because there's so many mechanics that just nudge you off at the last second, not to mention the amount of activations it takes to actually have your guys cover that many objective tokens. Before becoming inspired, they're pretty substandard. I mean, generally 3 wounds, which is pretty easy to take out. They have no special abilities, they have no range capabilities, and their defense is always bad. They have 1 shield, 1 block defense, which is debatably even worse than a dodge defense because it can be cleaved through. So that summarizes my opinion of the fighter cards. Let's take a look at these guys' objective cards. Starting with the Surge, we have Ferocious Charge. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter takes an enemy fighter out of action with a charge action worth 1 glory point. I'm rating this as a B because it's actually pretty decent. I mean, these guys do a lot of damage. They have generally pretty good 2-hit. Main challenge is that they have really terrible movement, so if you draw this in the first round, unless you're playing against an aggressive warband, it might be very difficult to actually reach an enemy and even take the swing that will take them out of action. Next we have Scion of Grimnir. Score this immediately if your leader takes an enemy fighter out of action, or 1 glory point. I'm giving this a B as well because it's not contingent specifically on making a charge action, so you can just do it with a normal attack. It also requires that Grimnir take the unit out of action, and he does a lot of damage, so it's usually a decent card to add to your deck, albeit one that's not guaranteed to score. And that's all they have for Surge objectives. Let's look into their score in the end phase cards, starting with Acclaim Retaken. Score this in an end phase if a friendly fighter holds an objective that an enemy fighter held at the beginning of the preceding action phase, worth 2 glory points. I'm ranking this as a B because it's actually pretty decent. It just requires that one unit hold one objective. Problem is that it relies on many factors, that being that an enemy fighter was holding an objective at the preceding action phase, meaning that at the earliest you can only score this in the second round. It also requires that your enemy made an active effort to hold objectives unless you use a distraction or something to push them on an objective at the last minute. So it is a bit of a tricky one to pull off, but it's worth 2 glory. Only requires one of your units, so I'm giving this a B. We have a Grim Promise. Score this in an end phase if your warband took an enemy leader out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a D just because with their low movement, it's really hard for them to cross that gap and specifically target a leader. I mean, these guys are going to hit anybody that they can get their hands on with their low movement. And all it does is give 1 extra glory in an end phase. Not really worth putting in your deck. Maybe worth a C, but I put it as a D. For the Urgold, score this in an end phase if all of your surviving fighters, at least 3, are inspired, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a D because these guys are incredibly difficult to inspire. You have to have 3 surviving and inspired to pull this card off in an end phase, and it's only worth 1. We got Fury of the Lodge. Score this in an end phase if all your surviving fighters, at least 3, made a charge action in the preceding action phase. I'm giving this a D as well because this warband has terrible movement. It's only worth 1 in an end phase. Very little to guarantee that you're going to have 3 units that are actually able to bridge that gap and make charge actions, assuming they're even alive because they only start off with 3 wounds and may have been taken out of action before you even draw this card. We have Hoarders. Score this in an end phase if all of your fighters and no enemy fighters are holding objectives, worth 2 glory points. I'm giving this a C because it can be useful in the late game. If you're down to 1 or 2 guys, it's pretty easy to get them onto objective tokens. Problem is that no enemy fighter is able to be holding an objective in order for this card to score, which means you have to have lots of ploys in your hand specific to just knocking units off of objectives, which makes this card pretty hard to pull off. Pride of the Lodge. Score this in an end phase if your leader has 3 or more upgrades with his warband symbol, worth 1 glory. That's a D. These guys don't have the greatest upgrades. Getting 3 equipped specifically on your leader for 1 glory point is just stupid. And finally, we got Unstoppable Advance. Score this in an end phase if all of your surviving fighters are in enemy territory, worth 2 glory points. I'm giving this a B because if you decide to play an aggressive style, this is pretty likely to score, especially if you're only down to 1 or 2 units. But with the low movement, it's probably not going to be the case that you're able to pull this off in the first round, so I'm only giving it a B. And that does it for the score in the end phase cards. Let's look at their final card, a score in the third end phase card called Oaths Still to Fulfill, worth 3 glory. Score this in the third end phase if none of your fighters are out of action. I'm giving this a D because these guys have terrible defense. And similar to the comments I made when I was talking about Iron Skulls boys, I've never played a game of Warhammer Underworlds where all of my units made it to the end. Now that does it for the objective cards. So generally speaking, objective cards promote taking enemy fighters out of action, inspiring, surviving, holding objectives in unique ways, entering enemy territory, and upgrading with faction-specific cards. Next, we're going to be looking at this warband's power cards. These guys just have ploys and upgrades, no spells because they have no spellcaster. We're going to start with the first ploy, which is Berserk Fury. The first time a friendly fighter suffers damage in the next activation, roll a defense dice. If the result is a shield, they suffer no damage. I'm giving this a D because you have to telegraph, first of all, that you're waiting for the enemy to take an attack at you. And then if they decide to do it, which they might just decide to skip and not attack you that round, wasting this card, even then you have less than a 50% chance of actually avoiding that damage. So this is definitely not a good card. We have Grimnir Commands. The first friendly fighter, other than your leader, to make a move action, not as part of a charge action, in the next activation has +2 move. You can only play this if your leader is on the battlefield. So I'm giving this a B because it's okay. I mean, it could give +2 movement to one of your units who isn't your leader, as long as you're not charging. So considering these guys have such bad movement, it is a nice little boost. Although there are lots of restrictions, Spectral Wings is a lot better. Indomitable. The first time a friendly fighter suffers damage in the next activation, they only suffer 1 damage. I'm giving this an A because it's a great card. You play it, almost guarantees that if you have a unit in a bad spot, he's not going to be able to get taken out of action in the next activation, which could give you a chance to either score some objective cards or just to do something useful to either save him or just deter the enemy from scoring their own glory points. So this card, I believe, would go in almost everybody's Chosen Axes deck. We have Living Wall. Choose 2 friendly fighters and push each of them up to 1 hex. but they must end up adjacent to one another. I'm giving this a B just because they're forced to move together. Because this Warband's Inspire mechanic, I mean, a strong play style with them is to try to hold objectives, which are rarely next to each other. So the fact this card puts the stipulation that they must be adjacent to each other is nice for aggressive play, but these guys with their low movement struggle a lot in aggressive play, so I can't really give it higher than a B ranking. We got Oathsworn. As a reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's attack action that fails. That fighter can make another attack action that targets the same fighter, so you get the old double swing. I'm giving this a B because it's a nice reliable card that allows you to potentially land an attack that you missed. We have Piercing Stare. Choose an enemy fighter. They cannot make an attack action or charge action in the next activation. I'm giving this an A as well just because it can really castrate your opponent if timed correctly. So that if you have an enemy fighter who just great strength, who just inspired attack, who just played a bunch of ploys to make them really beefy, to which some of those effects only apply in the next activation, you Piercing Stare them, it completely ruins their plan, making this card very useful. Also doesn't have limits on range, so that's very nice. We have Slaying Blow. If the first attack action in the next activation is a critical hit, double its damage characteristic. I'm giving this a C, although maybe it could be worth a B. If it was a reaction that you can just pull it out when you get a crit do double damage, then it would be a super badass card. The fact you have to play it and then hope for that crit the next activation makes it pretty challenging. It's nice if tied with Haymaker or Potion of Rage, though, and can cause a one-shot on Molog even. So, I mean, maybe a B. I put it as a C, but now that I'm talking about it more, I think it's actually worth a B. The Earth Shakes. Choose a fighter and push them 1 hex. I'm giving this an S just because it's a great card. It's like a distraction and a sidestep, but you get to choose how you apply it. Very useful for these guys, especially considering their movement challenges and the fact they need to hold objective tokens in order to inspire. Treasure Lust. Choose a friendly fighter and push them up to 3 hexes. They must end up holding an objective. I'm giving this an S as well. A 3 hex push card is really powerful, helps these guys cover a lot of distance, helps them grab those objective tokens last minute if necessary to inspire, to score those objective cards like Supremacy. This is a very good card. Don't leave home without it. Urgold Boon. Choose a friendly fighter and roll a defense dice. On a roll of shield or crit, remove up to 2 wound tokens from them. Otherwise, remove 1 wound token from them. So it's a faction-specific healing potion. I'm giving it an A because very few warbands have a healing mechanic like this, and it just makes these guys more durable, which is nice. We shall not be moved. Friendly fighters holding objectives cannot be driven back by the first attack action in the next activation. I'm giving this a B because it's pretty nice if you're holding an objective and you don't want to be knocked off of it, but it's also pretty circumstantial, so I can't give it a higher rating than this. So that covers our ploys, and to summarize, the Gambit cards, or the ploys, generally promote preventing damage, pushing friendly and enemy fighters, improving movement, improving attack accuracy, and holding objectives. So that covers all the ploys. Let's take a look at the upgrade cards. Starting with Activated Runes. Each time this fighter makes an attack action, you can reroll 1 dice. I'm giving this an A because it's very nice, just increases your chance of landing an attack. It can be equipped on any of the Chosen Axe's units, and these guys do a lot of damage. We got Brute Strength, applies only to Tefk, gives him knockback 1. I'm giving this a D because Tefk, when inspired, does 3 damage, which is enough damage to kill most units, making the knockback not super useful. And knockback generally is not that useful anyway, and the fact that it's restricted to Tefk just makes it not really worth putting in your deck. We have Defiant Strike, unique to Tefk as well. As a reaction, after an attack action that succeeds against Tefk, he can basically punch back with a 3-sword attack doing 1 damage. So I'm going to rate this as a B because it is decent having that out-of-turn attack, but it's also contingent on the fact that he was attacked, that the attack landed, which is pretty likely, but that the attacker attacked while adjacent to Tefk, and that Tefk survived it, which if he's inspired, there's pretty good odds that he survived it, but if he's uninspired, he might be dead. So it's an okay upgrade, but it's nothing that's too great. We have Flurry of Blows, unique to Maegrim, 1 range, 3 swords, 2 damage. So it basically gives him his inspired attack, but I guess you can equip it on him before he's inspired, albeit you don't get that reroll. So I'm going to give this a C because it's nice if Maegrim isn't inspired, but once he's inspired, his natural attack is superior to this. I mean, I would encourage just trying to inspire Maegrim to get the better attack instead of relying on an upgrade that's just not as good as his basic attack action. Great Swing, unique to Vol. It's a scything attack, hitting on 2 swords, doing 2 damage. I'm giving this a C because it has really low accuracy. Grimnir's Blessing, unique to Grimnir. During an attack action or ploy that would take this fighter out of action, roll the defense dice. If you roll a shield, the damage suffered by this fighter is ignored. I'm giving this a B because it could save Fuel Grimnir. It applies to ploys as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to spells, and it is only a less than 50% chance of saving Fuel Grimnir's life, but you also don't have to discard it, so if it actually works, you can keep using it and hopefully have Grimnir avoid death on multiple occasions, albeit with low odds. So I'm giving it a B because it could be pretty amazing if you're lucky. We have Grimnir's Fortitude, +1 defense for Grimnir, bringing him from 1 shield to 2 shield. I'm giving this a C because it is a nice boost to defense, but it's unique to him. I mean, it depends on how much emphasis you want to put on having Grimnir lead the pack. Similarly, but better, we have Grimnir Speed, which gives Grimnir a +2 move. I'm giving this an A because it would bring him from 2 to 4 move, or 3 to 5 move, and Grimnir with 5 movement, attacking with cleave, 2 hammers, and doing 4 damage makes him scary to anybody on the board. He can reach leaders, clock them in one shot, assuming they're not too beefy, and it just overcomes Grimnir's biggest weakness, which is his movement, and it does it with an exclamation mark. So this card is actually really good. Returning Axe, unique to Maegrim, 3 range, 2 hammers, 1 damage, and an extra damage on a crit. I'm giving this a D just because of the very low accuracy, although I do like the range option. If this thing was 3 swords for 1 damage and an extra damage on a crit, I'd move this up to a B because it would actually make it useful. As it stands right now, it's just unreliable and not worth putting in anybody's deck. And finally, we have War Song, restricted to Vol. Vol is considered to be 2 supporting fighters when they support rather than 1. So this makes Vol better at supporting. I'm giving this a B because if you want to take a clustering playstyle where you close the gap and take swings, and you have Vol up in there giving you support, it can really highly increase your odds of success. All right, and that does it for the upgrades. So in general, upgrades promote improving defense for Grimnir. It gives him more defense, makes him able to potentially negate damage with Grimnir's Blessing. It improves the movement of Grimnir. It generally improves attack accuracy with cards like Activated Runes, and also provides a number of unexceptional weapon upgrades for your warband as a whole. Just to take a final look at how I rated all these cards, the objective cards are pretty unexceptional. There's no S-ranked cards, there's no A-ranked cards. Most of these cards fall somewhere in the middle, and they have a whole pile of crap with a bunch of D-ranked cards. Gambits are clearly the strong suit of this warband. They have 2 S-tier cards, 3 A-tier cards. They have some that are average or below average, but I mean, generally, you're going to be putting a lot of faction-specific ploys into your power deck whenever you build a deck for Chosen Axes. And upgrades are probably going to take a select few that are pretty good, but none of it is overly amazing. A lot of their cards are just not very useful. That's the end of my assessment of all of this warband's cards. So now it's time to rate this warband to see how they stand compared to other warbands. So to summarize, this warband has a good set of ploys, and their ploys promote a diverse playstyle. However, the fighters of this warband are very unimpressive until they inspire, and they probably have the most difficult to achieve inspire mechanic in the game. So once they do inspire, they get lots of boosts, become pretty badass, but before then, they're not strong whatsoever, and getting them inspired is a big headache. Their best objective cards support an aggressive playstyle, but their inspire mechanic necessitates holding objectives in an end phase, so it shows a disconnect between what the goals of this warband should be compared to how they ought to be played. And finally, and this is a long one, their movement is low. Okay, this means a lot of stuff. It means you have to invest many actions and into many power cards to be able to successfully hold objectives in an end phase, and they struggle to reach evasive opponents, meaning overall that they have fewer tools to be successful than aggressive warbands in aggressive play. So they're not as good at aggression as aggressive warbands, and they're not as good at holding objectives as objective holding warbands because they have fewer tools than other warbands like Zarbag's Gits, or Thorns of the Briar Queen, or even Sepulchral Guard who have special movement mechanics. So with all this in mind, I'm rating this warband as a D. They struggle a lot, and I have made strong decks with this warband, and I've played against strong decks, but all things being equal, these guys just have a disadvantage and don't have access to as good cards as other warbands do. So that's my assessment of the Chosen Axes. Please tell me your thoughts. Please tell me your suggestions by commenting below. Please like and subscribe if you like these videos and you'd like me to make more of them. That does it for me today, and I hope you all have a nice day.